When discussing the 4 abdominal muscles that are responsible for maintaining the body's stability and balance, we are going to go into the structure and function of these muscles. First, we're going to discuss the most medial of the 4 muscles that create the muscle group of the abdominal wall, the rectus abdominis. So this is the muscle that gives the washboard aesthetic, or the six-pack aesthetic that a lot of people think of when they think of abs or your abdominal muscles. So the origin of the rectus abdominis is the pubic symphysis and the pubic crest. When we look here, this is where the rectus abdominis is. It is most medial right here, and you can see the six-pack aesthetic that the linea alba, which is connective tissue, helps create within the muscles. You can see that the striations run vertically so that when the trunk compresses, the insertion and origin points come closer together when the muscles contract. As we discuss the function of each of these muscles, it is important to have the knowledge that muscles are made up of myofilaments, which create striations along the muscle. And these myofilaments are responsible for contracting the muscle and shortening it so that it directs the movement that the muscle is responsible for. So when we go into striations, just take note of the direction of the striations and what movements these directions will cause or initiate. There are 3 muscles that are lateral to the rectus abdominis, and each of these muscles are layered within the abdominal wall. So the external oblique muscle is the most superficial muscle of the lateral muscles of the abdominal wall. The origin of this muscle is the external surface of the ribs of ribs 5 through 12, and then the insertion point down here is the linea alba in the center, the pubic crest, the iliac crest, and the pubic symphysis. So all basically regions of your hip and your pubic bone. These striations run medial to lateral. So if we're looking, they're going to run in this direction. So more towards your pubic bone. So deep to the external oblique is the internal oblique muscle. And this muscle has striations that run perpendicular to the external oblique muscle. So we just discussed how the external oblique muscle striations run medial to lateral, whereas we're going to see that the internal oblique muscles run medial to lateral instead of lateral to medial like the external oblique muscles. So that will create a 90-degree angle and make them responsible for different movements, but sometimes these muscles will work synchronously to create a specific movement or rotation of the spine. So the insertion point of the internal oblique muscles are going to be the lower ribs, the iliac crest down here, and then the linea alba, which is right here in between the internal oblique muscles and the rectus abdominis that we discussed earlier. The deepest layer of the lateral muscles is going to be the transverse abdominis. So this muscle's striations, they run mainly horizontally, so they're not going to be running in a diagonal direction like the external and internal oblique muscles. This muscle connects to the spinal region and to the linea alba. So as you picture that in your head, that would mean that it runs anteriorly to posteriorly. So it connects around this region where your linea alba is, the connective tissue, all the way around to where your spine would be. So as I discussed those for muscles, I was talking about the linea alba. So the linea alba is actually the connective tissue that is medial, and it connects to the xiphoid process, which is right below your sternum, like in your heart region, and then it connects all the way down to your pubis. So this is the connective tissue that keeps this whole muscle group together and kind of allows these muscles to move in synchronous movements. Together, this muscle group is responsible for certain actions that involve the hip and the spine. So these actions may be flexion or extension of the spine. Flexion would be when the ribs move closer to the pubis. So if you're laying on your back and you are compressing your spine, your ribs are moving closer to your pubic bone. Extension would be the reverse of that, where you're moving away. So when you're moving away, you would think of really your back muscles, and this is where the transverse abdominis comes in. Another movement that they're responsible for is rotation of the spine. So this could be internal or external rotation, and this would definitely include the lateral muscles, so the internal oblique, the external oblique, and the transverse abdominis. So the contraction of these muscles is actually directed by neurological signals that excite these muscles, which leads to the contractibility of the muscles. So calcium within the sarcoplasm causes the protein of the myofilaments, which we discussed earlier, are the striations. It causes these to change shape and contract. So if we're thinking of myofilaments, and this is what they would look like, contraction would cause them to pull in and move closer. So the insertion point and the origin would move closer together. This is also known as the sliding filament theory. And this is why muscles can only pull and they cannot push. Motor units, there's thousands of them within a muscle. So not all of these motor units that get excited by neurological signals will be activated at the same time. So motor units kind of allows there to be control of the muscle contraction or the strength of the contraction. So if less motor units are excited, then the contraction will be weaker than the contraction of the muscle if all of these motor units were contracted. So all of this kind of is in need of energy or calcium within the sarcoplasm. So obviously activation of all motor units would not allow the muscles to contract for that long. There's two different types of contraction that are important to note. There is concentric contraction and eccentric. So concentric contraction is when the muscles move closer together, they shorten, which we discussed about in regards to the sliding filament theory, and then eccentric contraction is the active lowering of the muscles. So if we were to use specific ab workout examples to describe these different contractions, concentric muscle contraction would be the compression of your spine during a sit-up. So you're using your abdominal muscles to compress your trunk, whereas eccentric contraction would be when you're doing leg lifts and you're laying on your back, you lift your legs, and while you lower them, you are using a controlled or active lowering of your muscle. So hopefully these visuals help you understand more about how you can activate your abdominal muscles or how they are beneficial for keeping you stable and balanced.